Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jerica Richardson, and I am the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the National Urban League. We want to thank you for joining us for our June Black Census Roundtable convening, where we are going to be focusing on public health equity and really harnessing census data in this conversation. And I just want to thank all of you all for joining us. And I will turn this meeting over to our president and CEO and co-convener of the Black Census Roundtable, Mark H. Morial, president and CEO of the National Urban League. Mark, take it away.
Jerica, thank you very much, and good afternoon to all. And a very special thanks to Jerica and also to Ihioma, and also Jerry Green, who worked very closely, and Tara Murray, as well as all of the National Urban League staff team and consulting team that works on the Black Census Roundtable. I also want to thank Melanie Campbell, co-convener, for continuing leadership and power in addressing and understanding why the census is a fundamental article of American democracy. And I want to thank all of you who have continued to stay engaged in this Black Census Roundtable. Just a few quick things. The census is a decade-long process. And it is a process to gather data, yes, for the purposes of apportionment and reapportionment, but also for the purposes of policymaking, distributions of money, appropriations, and the like. And today, there'll be a discussion on how census data has been used to inform public policy decisions across the board. As the Census Bureau plans and prepares for the 2030 census, there are many, many issues we continue to advocate for. Central, in my mind, is ensuring that we end prison gerrymandering. We've been in a long fight to work to end that. A number of states have sought to take steps in the correct direction. And there are certainly issues to ensure that 2030 is going to be a place where there's going to be a full and complete count. We've fought some battles over racial designations on the census form. And our team, by working together, all of us, we're demonstrating that the census and the data gathering process of the Census Bureau is important to Black America and to all of our constituents and communities across the nation. So with that, I will turn it over to Reverend Patrick Young, who serves as a special advisor to us on faith and religious matters, to open us with a word of inspiration and prayer. Reverend Young.
Thank you, Mark. Let us pray. Eternal Creator, who has provided us the opportunity to share in the fight for equity for all people. As we celebrate this moment of coming up weekend of our freedom as a people, we also now call to be a people, to express our fight for equity and fairness in this process of the census and the process of providing opportunities for our communities across this nation. We ask your blessing in our conversation. Lead us, open up our ears and open up our minds that we may receive and learn so we be better equipped to speak up and speak out in a voice of power and a voice of change. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jerica, who will take it from here. Or do we go to Melanie first, Jerica?
We're going to go to Melanie.
So my sister in the struggle for many, many decades, I want to thank her again for all of her leadership. Melanie Campbell is a defender of democracy. Melanie Campbell is a promoter of diversity. Melanie Campbell fights every day to defeat poverty and racism. Melanie.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here. Thank you for your leadership, partnership, friendship, and all of that. And also want to, special shout out to Jerica and Naomi um, and, and Jerry and everyone. It's really apropos to be having this conversation today, as we are preparing to our history and understanding that there's a connecting point to the census and what that does when it comes to for our people. So I think it's apropos. I'm glad we're having this conversation today. So I just want to welcome everyone. Joy to be all of you, and looking forward to the conversation today and the learning and the strategy that we gain from these conversations. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Reverend Young. I just really am glad that we are having this conversation, and I am really it would be important for me to also lift up, as we're thinking about civic engagement, that we are in an election year, and do want to encourage you all that the National Urban League's national conference is scheduled next month for July. It's kicking off on July 24th and going through July 27th. Just encourage all of you all, our partners in this fight and in this work in the movement, to join us there in New Orleans. Obviously a city that's very familiar to President Morial. Join us there in New Orleans. We are really going to be laser focused on so many of the issues that impact our community. Civic engagement absolutely is going to be front and center. And we know Census is a very big part of that work. And so just want to flag that for you all. And now I will turn the floor over to our special advisor for Census, and she helps to run the day-to-day work of our Black Census Roundtable, Ioma Iruka. Ioma?
Thank you very much, Erica. So glad to be here with you all. And again, thank you all for your patience as we dealt with some technical difficulties, but glad to be here with you all. I'm going to be brief because I know we want to conserve the time for our guest speakers here. Just to remind us here that we'll look out for your email box for all the various announcements and opportunities to continue to engage in census-related matters, including a virtual briefing on Thursday around OMB's race ethnicity standards. But just to remind you, we'll have our next two meetings, September 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then after that, our last one for 2024 will be November 19th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, I want to actually welcome Jerry Green, who is an accomplished career, as a civic engagement professional, and has led a long work of outreach efforts with the national organizations and local and federal governments. And she's also a consultant and member of the Census Black Roundtable. And I want to say recently appointed member of the Census Advisory Committee. So Jerry, we'd love for you to take a couple of minutes to share a little bit about the Census Advisory Committee for 2030 before we introduce our other guest speakers. Jerry,
Okay.
can I pass it over to you?
Sure. Thank you so much. And this will be a little more than a couple minutes as we spoke, but I'm happy to be here today, Ioma. Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to talk briefly about the status of the 2030 census, and it's much closer than we think. As you mentioned, having spent 20 plus years as a former Census Civic Engagement Manager, I can tell you, having worked with vulnerable communities to achieve an accurate count, the time is now to become engaged on these issues, as Mark said. He didn't mention, however, that the National Urban League has been an advocate for an accurate census for the past 65 years. The Black Roundtable, of course, was established in 2018 by both the National Urban League and the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation to help ensure an accurate count of the previous census. However, we're fully engaged in 2030 census planning, and through the Black Roundtable, the National Urban League has taken, and the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation have taken the lead in getting our voices heard at the table now. So what's happening over there at the census? You know, Mark sometimes describes it as a black hole. So I'll tell you a little bit. So early planning for the 2030 census actually began in 2019, a whole year before the end of the last census. So it is a process that takes a full, complete 10-year cycle. What they have been doing is assessing lessons learned from the previous census, including the IT component. This was the first time there was an online census, and also looking at lessons learned from the pandemic. And there were many, many lessons to be learned. So from now through 2029, the overarching goals of the 2030 census are to research, test, design, rinse, and repeat in that order. There are going to be so many studies and tests conducted over the next 5 years. And the census must do these things because, as we all know, new technologies emerge, population shift, and like it or not, politics do be happening. So as such, census must test and design operations that anticipates these challenges as much as it can and inoculate the census against potential risks. So what else is happening? This is very important. In 2022, the census solicited input from the public on priority research concerns and needs for the 2030 census. There were 8,000 comments received, and of course, the National Urban League and the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation were among those 800 respondents. The National Urban League specifically requested that the Census Bureau identify new research and methodologies to address the historic undercount of Black people. This is not a cookie cutter process for us. So we want to count the entire Black population, including the Black diaspora, Black men who have been historically counted in every age group, and our children as well. Another Urban League request was that the Census Bureau change its residence criteria to count incarcerated individuals at their home jurisdictions rather than in far-flung rural, largely white counties and cities as currently practiced by the Census Bureau. Mark just talked about prison-based gerrymandering. Moving on to another important update, the U.S. Census Bureau recently established a 2030 Census Advisory Committee, which you just mentioned. There are 23 members on this committee, stakeholders and organizations. And this committee will play an important role in helping the Census Bureau devise strategies to improve the census, particularly for historically undercounted populations. Our very own Mark Morial chaired this committee in 2010. So you can see the level of influence this 2030 committee will have on designing and planning the new census. As you mentioned, I am a member of the committee, and I will solicit your feedback and perspectives regularly in the weeks and months ahead so that the Census Bureau hears our voices. They need to hear our voices, and we need to occupy this space. Just for the record, Ioma, the first meeting will be held on July 26th, and it is virtual. And then finally, what we need from you. This is a point that I cannot overemphasize, and that is, there is no lag time for the census. We're halfway there. It is constitutionally mandated, and it will occur on time with or without our input. So we have to gear up for that. We need people in our organizations to keep abreast of the 2030 census and be ready to respond. When we throw the cap up, we need people to come, okay? Because we will be needing you. It's already heating up politically. And so we need you to respond if we ask. Ioma, we need to be laser focused on the Census Bureau's appropriations to make sure critical research objectives on historically undercounted populations, us, are not line item out of the census budget during partisan congressional appropriation battles. This happens every decade, and it is a battle. And we need to fight and advocate for an accurate Black count in every census form that we occupy. I don't care if they're counting, if there's a census of polywogs, we need to make sure all the Black polywogs are counted. But we need to be vocal and show up in this battle from now until 2030 period. I have a couple more. We have to start petitioning our state legislators for 2030 census funding now to establish state and local complete count committees. And I'm gonna finally say, Ioma, you're in these battles every day. We must pay attention to all proposed 2030 census innovations, which I put in quotes, to ensure they are not cloaked as strategies to improve the census, while at the same time having adverse effects on the Black count. And I know I get an amen, at least from one person on that. So I'll stop here and I'll turn the mic over to you and Jerica. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jerry. You got an amen throughout. I just was muted. So thank you. And so we are so thrilled that Jerry will be on that committee. And so we'll be following up with you all. And we really, really need all of us to be engaged to really make sure the 2030 census does not leave us behind again.
Again,
So thank you, Jerry. And we definitely just appreciate her continued engagement with us and just all the work you continue to do on our behalf. So with that, it's also now my pleasure to let me make sure I get my pictures correct. Let me share my I need to make sure I play my screen to introduce our amazing guest speakers. Let me stop sharing first of all. Sorry, hold on. I was doing too many screen sharing here. Okay, I'm going to share my screen so you can see our speakers shortly. It is my pleasure. Once I share my screen, it'll be my pleasure. Okay, here we go. All right, you should be able to see my screen. Perfect. Okay, I think we're there. Okay, perfect. So now it's really my pleasure to turn to the main content of our roundtable meeting today. We know that there are many ways to leverage the census at national and local levels, and we are so thrilled to have our guest speakers here today to share information about how the census is being used in Illinois to address health equity for Black communities and what that means for other states and local communities. So I want to take a moment to really introduce them in the most appropriate way. First, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Margaret Eaglin, an infectious disease epidemiologist at the Chicago Department of Public Health. Dr. Eaglin, is also an adjunct professor at the UNC Gillen School of Global Public Health, where I'll be joining in the next couple months, where she teaches courses in the Public Health Leadership Program. For the last 30 years, Dr. Eaglin has served as a public sector epidemiologist. She has expertise as a leader and scientist, strategically analyzing data to identify innovative solutions to advance the health and racial equity, social justice, and the well-being of the communities that she continues to serve. Dr. Eaglin holds a Doctor of Public Health in Leadership from the University of Illinois at Chicago School of Public Health, a Master of Urban Planning and Policy and Economic Development and Environmental Planning from the University of Illinois at Chicago College of Urban Planning and Policy, a Master of Public Health and Epidemiology from the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology. Welcome, Dr. Eaglin. It is also my pleasure to welcome Sister Ya Simpson, also known as Sister Ya, who is a community epidemiologist for TAC, which stands for the Association of Clinical Trial Services, and for the Chicago Department of Public Health, a one-of-a-kind community epidemiologist that has continually advocated for health equity among Black Chicagoans, for the past 30 plus years. Using data analysis, she has written several epidemiologic data profiles and case studies which demonstrate the inequities of health outcomes of Blacks as compared with non-Blacks. She was also recognized by former mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, as a co-author of the first of its kind epidemiological data book entitled The State of Health for Blacks Living in Chicago. Sister Ya is the recipient of several awards and serves on various boards. She holds a Master of Public Health and Bachelor's of Arts from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She also holds an Associate of Applied Science from the Community College of Air Force Surgical Service Technology and is pursuing a doctoral degree in my words are not coming out right. In a doctoral degree in epidemiology, Sister Ya calls herself a community epidemiologist. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Eaglin and Sister Ya. Please,
Hey,
the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Hey, Margaret, just before we start, I have to tell everybody, I think one little misstep, but we've got to correct that a little bit. And that is we have our Deputy Commissioner here from the Chicago Department of Public Health, Brittany. You want to we have to give her a little bit of time because we work at CDPH, so we have to do that. Brittany,
yes, apologies.
In a little bit.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Brittany. Please, Brittany, Commissioner Murphy, is it Commissioner Williams, excuse me. Apologies for missing that. Please welcome and give your remarks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Williams. I am a Deputy Commissioner and also the Chief Racial Equity Officer at Chicago Department of Public Health. First, I'm going to keep this brief because I know we started a little bit late this morning or this afternoon, but it's a pleasure to be here. It is a pleasure to see so many people in this call around this table. You know, at CDPH, we have a goal to create an equitable, safe, resilient, and healthy Chicago. And so we have a Healthy Chicago plan, and in that plan, we use data from our health atlas, and that includes US Census data. And this data allows us to understand where the need is, how we need to meet that need in these specific communities. And so I can't stress enough how important it is for us to be engaged in the census process and for us to have our voices at the table when we are talking about how to distribute the resources and the needs of these communities across our country and in our city, of course. And so here at Chicago, I think we couldn't be having a more important conversation at this time. We want to make sure that we are addressing health disparities, life expectancy gaps, improving community health, and overall empowering community members to be able to take their own well-being and their own health into their own hands and have the resources and the support to do that. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to our panelists for today. Again, thank you all for having me. It is truly a pleasure and a blessing to be a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Commissioner Williams. Again, apologies, but glad you're able to join us. All right, Sister Ya and Dr. Eaglin, I'm happy to tell me when to go next, and I will do that and be quiet.
You're going to share the slide?
Yes, I will do just that. Yes.
In the meantime, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for inviting both Sister Ya and I to present our presentation at the June Black Census Roundtable. The title of our presentation is Black Matters, Black Counts, a discussion about the enumeration of the U.S. Black population in the census from 1790 to 2020. Next slide. Or can I move the slide? Okay, there we go. So this presentation will be divided in two parts. The first part, I'll provide sort of a historical timeline of how Black people were counted in the census from 1790 to 2020, and then really look at how the Black population has grown and become more diverse since 2000. And then Sister Yar will talk about the new 2020 the new 2020 population counts for the detailed Black or African American groups and how this information could impact future public health practice. Next slide. So this image, and I think people are familiar with this, what Census calls us a historical timeline, is an image that was produced by the Pew Research Center. And it provides sort of, again, this historical sort of look at how race, ethnicity, and origin categories have changed over time from 1790 to 2020. And again, as this change has been brought about by, again, like President Morial had discussed, change in racial views, social and political views, how, looking at the growth of the racial and ethnicity, the diversity of the nation, and then constant changes in the data collection and standard and practices. And so for the purpose of this presentation, I will focus on the red box, and that actually looks at the change in how Black people have been counted, how they've been identified, and how they've identified themselves over the course of from 1790 to 2020. Next slide. So as we know, the first census was started in 1790, and this was the first federally sponsored count of the nation's population, and it was President George Washington's most significant undertaking. And so the census fulfilled a constitutional mandate, and specifically that Article 1 and Section 2 basically reads, representation and direct taxes shall be apportioned among several states according to the representative numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons, and those all other persons were enslaved people, Black people. And so, as mentioned before, not only the objective of the census was to, of course, count the population, but also to serve to basically enable legislators to assign political representation in proportion to each state population. Next slide. So this 3/5 compromise was actually, a compromise between the Southern and Northern state delegates, and this actually occurred in the 1787 Philadelphia Constitutional Convention. They agreed that every enslaved American would be counted as 3/5 a person for taxation and representation. The pro-slavery states were giving more electoral power in positions of power than if they basically ignored, the enslaved population. And the examples of position of power, of course, were the presidency, vice presidency, the Supreme Court, Congress, etc. And so this 3/5 had, detrimental impact on enslaved Black people and the nation's indigenous population. It allowed slavery to basically expand and across the US and allowed enslavers to reclaim enslaved people who sought freedom by characterizing them as fugitives. And it also played a role in forced removal of indigenous people and their lands. Next slide. So during from 1790 to 1840, racial identification really depended on one's US citizenship and the nature of their participation in the political community. To be free and white and to be free and Black were two different things, distinct political experiences and communal experiences. For free whites, their citizens enjoyed, full benefit of political power, membership, what have you. For free Blacks, citizenship was, a constant source of uncertainty and ambiguity, adding to a layer of complexity to the antebellum period. Free Blacks were taxed like free whites, but did not enjoy the same, rights and entitlements. And next slide. So in 1850, there were 3 color options that were offered. This was for free people, white, Black, or mulatto. Enumerators were instructed to record Black, mulatto, and enslaved Black people and mulatto enslaved people separately. Mulatto was defined as someone who was of mixed ancestry, white and Black ancestry, and remained in the census through 1920. Enslaved people had separate forms, and they were counted under the name of their owner in the 1850 and 1860 census. And then in 1890 US Census, the racial categories of quadroon, these were introduced. Quadroon defined as 1/4 Black blood, and then octoroon, 1/8, or any trace of Black blood, was, like I said, introduced in 1890. And then Negro was used in conjunction with Black to describe African origin in the 1900 census. Negro referred to as full-blooded individuals, and then Negro descent referred to as mulattoes. Next slide. So in the 1930 census, enumerators were given specific instructions that used the term Negro. People who were mixed white and Negro blood were used to be counted as Negro, regardless of the proportion of Negro blood that they had. And this was considered the 1-drop rule. And then any persons who was white and colored was to be counted according to the colored race, and mixed colored races were to be counted according to the race of the father. Self-response replaced enumerator reporting for most Americans in the 1960 census, and race was used for the first time, replacing color or race in the 1990 census. And respondents were allowed to choose more than one race for the first time in the 2000 census. And Black or Negro was then changed to Black or African American or Negro, making the first appearance of African American on the census form. And then the Bureau dropped the word Negro in the 2020 US Census. Next slide. So to transitioning a little bit, this slide actually looks at how, the US Black population has grown and become more diverse. Now, the US population is a composite of descendants of enslaved people and newly arrived Black immigrants. The population from 2000 to 2021 has increased by 30%. And the fastest growing group is multiracial, which increased 247%. followed by Black Hispanics, and this was a 180% increase. And then lastly, Black alone increased by 16%. Next slide. And so I'm going to transition the floor to Sister Yap.
Well, thank you, Dr. Margaret Evelyn. Of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. What we are talking about today is it has such a, we heard earlier today, such a historical component. But what I want to bring to you all today is this is the city of Chicago, specifically at Chicago Department of Public Health. We are going to get into being a case study about this topic because we've done some new things. So let's talk about what's new. So what has happened for the first time in the decennial history of the census, right? They were allowed to have a write-in for Black African American. It was able to be written in. This was among some of the 2020 census and how it was being calculated at the time. For 2020 census, there now are 3 regional Black areas, or groups, right? So the groups are Sub-Saharan African, they're Caribbean, and other African American or Blacks, meaning that we're not African American or Blacks alone. So this is what they're talking about when they say Black or African American groups. I want you to pay attention, though, to this word ethnicity. We're going to get into this. We're going to have a good discussion at the end. But ethnicities and racial categories are used by the U.S. Census to adhere to, what they've been doing since 1997. We've heard a little bit of that historical component for Dr. Margaret. But just know that the Office of Management and Budget, as we call it, OMB, makes these decisions. Next slide. So I want to make sure that we are going to be talking technical notes, not what we want, but what they said it is. So as you can see, the 2020 census detailed demographics and housing characteristics. This is how you would find their technical notes. So OMB requires what we know as 6 race categories, 6 of them. So as you can see, it says white, it says Black or African American. As you can see, it definitely puts out the Asian or Alaskan Native, Native American, Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders. So those are the things that they're calling what we're saying the word race. And as you can see, some other race, number 6. Then there's what we say 2 ethnicities. So ethnicity is Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, or non-Hispanic. So it's either you're Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, or not Hispanic. And those are the only 2 that are considered ethnicities. We're going to get into that. So let's deal with these, what we're calling census technical notes. So OMB standards that govern these definitions and categories, this is how they use to present the data of ethnicity and race. So based on their extensive research, and we've heard a little bit about this already, so I'm not going to read all that part for you, but people report multiple races to indicate race mixture, such as an American Indian and white. That's a mixed racial. So people can also identify their ethnicity as either Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, or they're not, or not. And the racial categories in the census questionnaire generally reflects a social definition. Please underscore social definition. So it is not biological, it's not anthropological, and it's definitely not genetic. So we're going to deal with that next slide. So I have to make sure that we are all on the same page. I don't know if everybody knows what Black is, but we're going to define it based here for the census. So that's a person or Black African American is a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa, the continent, including people who indicate their races as Black or African American, and they report their responses as African American, Jamaican, Haitian, Nigerian, Ethiopian, or Somalian. These are also categories you would find, such as Ghanaians, South Africans, Barbadians, Kenyans, people from Libya, Bohemians, etc. Those are the ones that you're noting. But what we see here is the definition for white. I want you to recognize they never say white American. It's just white. So these are persons who are having origins in the what we call original people of Europe, that continent, and now Middle East, which used to be part of Africa. but North Africa is also included as well. And these are people who are known to be white in their responses, and they're German, Irish, English, Italian, Lebanese, Egyptian from Egypt, that's in Africa, but that's what they got. The category also includes such as, Polish, French, Italian, Slav, Cajun, and Canadian as others. But I need us to understand ethnicity. I said we were going to come back to that because the definition of this is what they've written, again, not what I say. So their definition of this is a quality or a fact of belonging to a population group or subgroup made up of people who share a common cultural background and descent. So origins can be viewed as heritage, nationality groups, lineage, country of birth, persons who parents, as you heard, one was about the father, right? Their ancestors before arriving in the United States. So people who identify their origin as Hispanic, Latino, Spanish can also be made of all these races as well, the 6 races. Next slide. So where does this take us? Well, we have to talk about a global map view. I just wanted you to see this really quick. We're not spending a time on it, but as you can see where Africa is in the center and Middle East used to be part of Africa, but nevertheless, that is a continent. Europe, and of course, we have the United States and South America. But just recognize where North Africa is still in Africa. And we're trying to talk about ethnicities and who we are as people and culture. I just wanted to bring that to your eyes because in the next slide, you're going to see Chicago. This is why this is important. And our colleague Jachumba Kanoch put these together. We want to thank Jachumba for this, for putting together our 77 community areas. So this is a Chicago map. And this is just one in your eyes. We'll go very quickly through this because we want to get to the discussion. But it's just where the Black or African-American regionals are within our 77 community areas. Because this is a national presentation, I just need you to know that in 1977, Chicago was divided up into 77 community areas. This is how we denote public health through populations. This is what you heard our deputy commissioner talk about, how we understand the rates of different ailments and life expectancy through our community area mapping. And that is what this is an image of. Next slide. I just want you to see that they have broken this down into 3 different subgroups. So you would understand that, this would be part of the regional group for the largest Black groups that exclude African-American loans, but they're mixed. Or the next slide, again, these 77 community areas that's looking at others. So those other sub-Saharan or Caribbean subgroups, this is mostly where they live in the city of Chicago. Some are up north in the middle of Chicago and definitely out south. But one thing that you should have gotten from all these maps is we are all here in the city of Chicago. So next slide, I want to really get to the crux of why we're having this conversation. We're having this conversation because for our Black History Month this year, we did for the first time ever, we tried to emulate what the U.S. Census did on the national level. We emulated that data here for the Chicago. This has never been out. This is the first time the nation is seeing it, and we have presented it to our people that participate in our Black History Month group. But I want you all to look at these 2 bars. So the first bar obviously is about Chicago. The second bar is about the U.S. And again, we did the same percentage distribution of Black or African-American population by regional groups. That's the term that they use. So you can see we have the Black African-American alone. We have Sub-Saharan in the orange. We have Green Caribbean and the others that are not those Africans, other Black and African groups. As you can see here, the U.S. has a little bit more for the African-American group, but what happened in Chicago is a lot of denotion of sub-Saharan African people living in Chicago by percentage. And I'll give you the numbers in a minute, a little smaller on the Caribbean, but we also have a smaller size than the U.S. as compared to the U.S. for sub-Saharan Africa. So let's look at the Black African-American group counts for 2020. Now in the U.S., it was denoted that that group, the Black population, represented about 46 million. In Chicago, though, the Black population represents 799,408 people. So this is the count as we talk about enumeration, the count. In that count, we subset who were considered the African Americans alone. And that's about 484,000. So you're looking to the right now, and you're looking at actual count numbers. This is what's brand new. We did these subgroups so we can measure what our percentages were according to the US Census. So sub-Saharan African people is about 30,000, and the Caribbean was about 7,000. And when we said others, that combination was 276,934 counts. But I was able to also demonstrate what were those highest counts. So you would understand, just like we read, those different African groups who were here in Chicago. So as you see the top 5, if you will, the top 4, if you see, is the Nigerian, the Ethiopian alone, the Ghanaian, the Haitian, and Jamaican. All of these groups combined make up the other Black and African American group. And I just wanted to bring you to that attention because I did exactly what the US Census did. And so we can compare ourselves to the US here in Chicago. Next slide. That was a very important aspect of our discussion. And we really wanted people to understand what we are talking about when we say Black African American. In this case, the 3 regional groups, Sub-Saharan African, and the other groups that were not African American alone. We wanted to make sure that we had this discussion about people's thoughts and continuing the change in the enumeration of Black people from the 1790s to the present. That's what Dr. Eaglin specialized in, is this historic component of it. But given these definitions that OMB has provided, and I gave you the technical definitions, should Black subgroups be categorized as ethnicities? Why or why not? Now, I will very clearly tell you my opinion is yes, we should. And that is where I would like to make this conversation go. But then let's have that discussion, because to me, their definition of ethnicities fit our sub-regional Black or African American subgroups. It fits the same exact notion. So what are our future actions or strategies should public health be doing regarding these US Census data? We have to talk about this because as an example of this, when we look at HIV data, we talk about who and what rates. Those rates are based on the number of people who have HIV that are living with it versus our population size so that we could give you a rate. I just gave you the example of how we use US Census data. And in the city of Chicago, Black women are actually among women. Men are first with the highest rate, but Black women have 4 times higher than that of all women who have HIV are leading the numbers in their rate of HIV in Chicago. So that's just an example of how we would use the census data in public health. These are our discussion questions. We hope you found that our presentation was insightful. Again, it has a historical component. It has obviously what is happening currently and recently. And more importantly, we want to push this to future implications. Again, we thank you for your time. If you go to the next slide, I just want to make sure that even though we're talking about those discussion questions, again, Jachumba, I want to make sure she did our mapping. She's a part of our team. And then we have another team here at the Chicago Department of Public Health, which works on epidemiology just as we do, Margaret and I do. Another team with Dan, Nick and Brianna. Dan was very instrumental in helping to make sure that I got that new data out that has never existed. So you can go back to the discussion questions if you'd like, or if you want to show the screen, but we want to thank you for allowing us this time to have this. Jachumba's friend Jamal made sure to connect us to you all, and we want to be a part of your discussion, hence moving forward. Again, thank you for your time and your insight about this topic.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eaglin. Thank you so much, Sister Ya. And we know we could have you and you could talk longer. Before, I know we have another, before you leave us, we have a lot of questions, but I at least want to get one in. And I do hope the rest of the roundtable members can stay just a little bit longer to give us a little bit of space to just have a couple of discussion items, and then but also hear from Tara Murray of the Washington Bureau. But so you're clearly using the census in much of your work. I'm wondering, from the changes that have happened since the 1790s till now, and you're looking at the census and sort of the different, say, rates of whether it's on public health side, does it change what you see when you look at it, when you look at the racial markings, right? So if you use say what it was in 2010 and then versus what it was in 2020, do you see things changing just because of the way things are categorized, or is it actual change, right? So trying to understand what is the change of the racial ethnic designation? Does it impact the kind of quality of data that you're seeing in Chicago?
So I'll go ahead and jump in. It's referring to public health because we use what we call the Chicago Health Atlas. So what would change for us specifically would be how we use the demographics, or so population size data. So for us, even though we, as you saw, we can say how many are Black or African American in a big group, but what would change for us is now we'll be able to say within that group, for example, how many HIV cases may exist for women who call themselves Nigerian or women who call themselves Caribbean. We would be able to denote that more specifically. And yes, that would have an impact because then our messaging could be more specific for obviously treatment, prevention, and interventions. But this is how public health operates. We need to make sure that we are being respectful and responsive to the people that live here in the city of Chicago. Dr. Margaret, you have something you want to add to that?
I mean, I definitely agree on what Sister Ya is talking about, but also, you know, seeing how that fast-growing multiracial category is being expanded. Now we've expanded to ethnicities. This is going to continue to grow as people are sort of changing their own racial thought, as new technologies are coming in and you know, for example, I took my DNA and it's a long list. My family, my father comes from Opelousas, Louisiana. I have to shout out for Louisiana, for President Morial. But on my mother's side, she found out her father's Jewish. So it's like including, I want to appreciate my Black ancestry, but also my other ancestry, and really characterizing, you know, having that opportunity to characterize my entire self, in other words. So I see this census change, you know, expanding, you know, giving people opportunities to basically identify themselves as they feel.
And
Now, how
that's
that data
right.
is going to be really interesting.
But the numeration of this thing, and especially through public health, is that I am requesting too that we include more than 2 ethnicities. That is what, as an epidemiologist, I'm clearly stating that having 2 ethnicities is not capturing people correctly. And just like Margaret, my DNA was also read by African ancestry, shout out, and I am Cameroonian, Bamileke, and Sierra Leone. So my father's people consistently are Bamileke people of the Cameroonians. And so, and I went back to Cameroon to talk to them too. But my point of it being is that this, as Margaret has said, is expanding, and we have to expand, and we have to be respectful toward the people who want to say social definition. This is what I am. I am, in my case, I am an African. I am a woman of Cameroonian descent. I want to be denoted as such. And hopefully we get to go into that. Before we end, though, I have to make sure that we give a shout out to our, I'm not sure if she's on, but you know, our Chicago-based president from the Urban League is also on, Miss Karen Wilson Freeman. So make sure that you all acknowledge her as well. I've just remembered.
I do want to just put in one quick point around ethnicity. How is this expansion of the ethnic groups, if we include, you know, if we change ethnicity to include other groups, how does this challenge the word race?
Yeah. Well, that's a good way. We could talk about that specific. Yeah, like that. I think we want to come back eventually when we have another time to actually talk about this issue of race ethnicity, because we were challenged by the Census Bureau for us to have a conversation around ethnicity regarding Black African American people. But because I want to make sure, but I want to thank both of you, Sister Ya, Dr. Eaglin, for really just getting us started in this work, and just look forward to continue to engage with you later on. But really thank you for really whetting our appetite on how to use the census around public health issues, and really having these really robust conversations. So thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Jerica to give space for Tara.
Yeah, could I ask one question for your transition?
Okay.
In terms of thinking about what has been presented, what would you say the implications are, or should there be some implication if we ever get to the point if we're going to be remunerated for all of the atrocities that has happened. When you look at, this information like ADOS, American descendants of slaves, just say, for instance, when you look at the other subgroup categories, when it comes down, to that particular element there, is that not a way to see who would receive those funds, or is that data just relegated in one particular area?
Thank you.
So-
Before you answer,
It'd be
Sister
useful.
Ya, and
Okay.
thank you for that question. Before, I do want to make sure, I just want to give space to our executive director at the Washington Bureau, just because of time. But can we just pause on that question, and you can also answer in the chat. I just want to give her space while we still have some of our members here. But thank you for that question, Mr. Parker. Jerica, can we have Tara, she's still here, just give a quick update from the Washington Bureau. But Sister Ya and Dr. Eaglin, please stay tuned or use the chat to respond to Mr. Parker's question.
I'm right here, Ioma. Thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating discussion, and I wish we could continue it for much longer. I'm going to be really brief because I know we're at time, but I just wanted to uplift a few things that are happening in Washington at the time, at this moment, that I wanted to make sure folks were tracking. So first is the Affordable Connectivity Plan, which, as many of you likely know, aided over 23 million individuals in obtaining access to broadband, ended last week as its funding was not continued by Congress. And so the termination of this program will significantly impact low-income families and individuals who relied on affordable internet for education, for work, for healthcare, and for other essential services. And so for the purposes of those joining today's call, I just wanted to share that limited access to affordable internet can also hinder participation in the 2030 census, leading to an undercount of Black Americans who might face barriers in completing online census forms. So as an advocacy group and coalition, we need to push for permanent funding for ACP to ensure continued access to affordable broadband. The other thing I want to uplift is criminal justice reform efforts. So last month, during Police Week and the 4th anniversary of George Floyd's murder, there were several efforts by many on this call. I saw Ebony Riley from the National Action Network joining, but efforts made to engage lawmakers in passing police reform that emphasizes transparency, oversight, and community-centered public safety. Earlier this month, just last week, for Gun Violence Prevention Month, the National Urban League hosted a briefing with the Brookings Institute, Vera Action, the Center for Policing Equity, and the Futures Institute that featured discussions with Representatives Morgan McGarvey of Kentucky, Lucy McBath of Georgia, and Gabe Amo of Rhode Island on community safety. We know that amongst other things, including our concerns around prison gerrymandering that Mark uplifted at the top of the call, accurate census data can highlight disparities in criminal justice, which provides crucial information to support the reforms that we are advocating for. And the last thing I wanted to uplift is something that Jerry alluded to at the top, which is about the appropriations process. So the FY25 budget process is facing challenges at the moment due to the inclusion of contentious riders affecting issues such as abortion access, immigration, voting rights, vaccine requirements, critical race theory, DEI, LGBTQ issues, run the gamut of issues. And the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which is scheduled for floor consideration this week, there are concerns that for the first time in 64 years, it might become a partisan issue. We know that what we're seeing now in terms of the attempts to use the appropriations process to attack DI, to attack immigration, to attack the things that many of us are working so hard on can extend to issues with the census, as Jerry mentioned. And so we just have to remain vigilant as a community on how this process is being utilized to cut and restrict access to funding for the programs and initiatives that support our community. So that's it. Just wanted to give those updates from Washington, and we'll turn it back over to you, Jerica.
Thank you so much for those updates, Tara. Thank you to our guests. I mean, this was a really riveting conversation, and one that it sounds like we need to continue and have an extended version, because there was just so much engagement and so much activity in the chat. I know we do need to bring this to a close, but I wasn't sure, were you, Sister Ya and Dr. Eaglin, were you able to respond in the chat to the last question that was asked? You did?
Unfortunately, very briefly. Politics and people, and of course, you know, we just already heard the update, so we got a challenge on our hands.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And really just thank you to everyone who's joined us. Definitely a great thank you to President Karen Freeman Wilson, and just really this talented group from Chicago. Really, Chi-Town was in the house, and you all really did an amazing job and shared great information with our Black Census Roundtable today. I also want to shout out Jamal Burns, who is our legal fellow, who has been engaged, and while he's in the background and serving as our tech chair, is really an amazing talent on the Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives team. He really brought forth this idea of talking about health equity and expanding how we think about the census. And so I really just wanted to lift up Jamal and thank him for his vision and his idea in bringing this conversation to the forefront. And really thank you all for joining us. All I will say is to be continued. Thank you, Yoma, for being such a great moderator of the Q&A, and thank you, Jerry, for joining us. We're so happy to see you in this new capacity and new role. On behalf of the National Urban League and the Black Census Roundtable, on behalf of Melanie and Mark, thank you all for joining us for this Black Census Roundtable conversation, and we will see you all again in September. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.